Welcome to the Omnibus Show, a program for people who are interested in everything, with deep conversations on a wide variety of subjects. And now your host, Dave Gibbs.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Omnibus Show, the program for people who are interested in everything, with deep conversations on a wide variety of subjects. We'll have deep conversations today. Our guest this episode is Robby Slaughter, who is the independent candidate for U.S. Congress in Indiana. Slaughter owned and operated a small business prior to running for Congress. The business provided professional speakers, facilitators, and consultants to clients all over the United States and Canada. At one point, the company was representing 15 different experts. He also worked in the IT field and as an adjunct faculty member at IUPUI, which is Indiana University, Purdue University at Indianapolis. Well, Robby, welcome. It's great to have you here today.
Happy to be here, Dave.
Well, thank you. Well, we've got a lot to talk about, deep conversations. Let's just go right into it. Going for Congress, that's a high mark.
Yes.
And so going right into, from the beginning, if you'd like to tell us about your personal background and your interest, what are the milestones, as I like to say, that led you into civics and into government?
Yeah. Well, personally, I'm an American. I grew up in the suburbs outside of Dallas. I came to Indiana over 20 years ago and had a business that I moved here and expanded. And got married and have a family and people here. And I think that, for me, the driving force behind politics is that I think we all have a sense of moral responsibility to our country, to our community, to our family, to the people around us who made our life and opportunity possible. And for most of my time on this earth, that opportunity with regard to government, with my moral responsibility, has been voting, has been staying informed, watching the news, finding out what's going on. And I've had a lot of trust in our elected leaders. Not so much that I voted for someone I trusted and they won and the other guy was the bad guy, but rather I had a sense that whoever they were, whatever party they were with, whatever their philosophies, they were good people in a system that allowed them to work together, to compromise, and to advance the country. But over the course of the last few years, it seems that this has really gone away, that we have shifted from a national dialogue about how best to improve and how to have difficult discussions and negotiations to one where the level of rhetoric, the screaming, the infighting, the hyperbole, and the inability to make any progress has become utterly extreme. And of course, the corporatization of our experiences, especially with regard to government, have just gone beyond any measure. Decisions are not made by representatives on behalf of people. They're made by the organizations, the lobbyists, the special interest groups who push for their own agenda, and they are the ones writing the laws and controlling the country. And so I feel that I'm at a point where I can no longer sit on the sidelines and just vote and stay informed, but that something needs to be done. And I think that I'm in a unique position as a person who cares deeply about our country, a person who is open-minded, who is even and balanced, who's not ideological, but is here to be truly representative. And I'm someone who's not partisan in any way, but is truly committed to our country and our community. I'm in a position, I think, to really help, and that's the reason I'm here.
And taking that step forward, what particular things happened that drew you to run for Congress this upcoming session?
Yeah,
this election year.
Yeah, certainly there are inciting events that have happened in the course of our country, right? Recent elections, also reactions to those elections. I'm fascinated in particular by the public reaction to the 2020 election. And I've been through, like you, dozens of elections, national and local in my life, and where I had to go to the ballot box and vote. And one of the most distinctive things about 2020 was at the end of that election, a third of the population believes that the election itself was not legitimate, that it was corrupt, that there was widespread fraud that changed the course of the outcome. And that is a wholly new phenomenon, right? In previous elections, even with 2000, remember the hanging chads?
2016 there was.
But 2016,
yeah,
but there was
the
pushback.
hanging chads was
yes.
one matter.
But 2020 specifically, the polls show, the analysis shows that never before have we had the degree of people who feel the outcome of the election was fraudulent. And to me, the fact that our reaction as a government, as a country, was just to accept that hatred, that reality, and continue to grow in our hatred and disgust for one another, rather than say, wait a minute, we got to stop and find out why we don't believe in our institutions anymore. To me, that is illustrative of the fact that we can no longer trust our representatives and our democracy under its current system. We need new people, new ideas, new blood who are not part of that approach to help restore and recover that trust.
Okay. That's a very good observation. How would you, just starting off with, let's say the process.
Yeah.
How would you, being in Congress, how would you address that process?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the first step is to get to Congress, right?
Of course.
And getting to Congress is incredibly difficult. Right now, most people who run for Congress and are successful do so with a party, and they do so with the party that is preordained to win in their community because the lines have been drawn to their advantage through the process we call gerrymandering. And they got to spend a lot of money, raise a lot of money from people, and they have to conform to the party's requirements. I'm not doing that at all. I'm running as an independent candidate, which means I'm not affiliated with any party whatsoever. And it also means that I have to not just file to get on the ballot, but I've got to collect thousands upon thousands of signatures. In fact, I brought some of them with me today just so you can see the effort involved. Every one of these, almost entirely, except for a few volunteers,
Mr. Smith goes to Washington.
People that I have met who have said, yes, Robby, I'm willing to sign your official government form to allow you to be on the ballot. Not that I'm going to vote for you, but I will be there. And so it is a massive effort, and this is only half of all the ones that I need to be on the ballot.
So that's 15,000.
Yeah, this is about 2,500 or so, about 3,000 or so of the
3,000.
of the 7,000 or so I need to be on the ballot, with plenty of extras for people who have moved away or whose handwriting's illegible or whatnot. But then actually getting to Congress, I think the only way that we're going to be able to tackle the enormous issues that face our country right now is if we focus first on restoring trust in government, restoring trust in our representatives. Because none of us have the time to be able to investigate all the issues, or even one issue that faces our country. We need to be able to trust our representatives to do the analysis, to be fair and impartial, and bring back the ideas to us and represent us as people. But if we don't trust them, they can't do that on any issue, whether it's foreign policy or immigration or firearms or education or anything. We can't begin to tackle these issues if we don't have trust in the representatives whose job it is to work on them for us. And I think trust begins with reforming Congress.
Well, that's it for Chapter 1. We'll be back after a brief break with the independent candidate for Congress, Robby Slaughter. Hello, and welcome back to the Omnibus Show. This is Chapter 2 in our conversation with Robby Slaughter. He's a U.S. Congress independent candidate for the 2024 election. Well, Robby, it's good talking with you. You felt very strongly about the issue in American politics on trust. Why don't we start from there, and how do you reform from that point, and from your vision?
Yeah, so there's so many issues facing our country right now, and in fact, everything seems to be on fire. Right, whether it's the border or whether it's healthcare, whether it's the national debt, everything seems to be on fire. But if everything is on fire, then nothing is on fire. If everything is urgent, then nothing is urgent. You can't focus. And
it's like a flooded basement.
That's right. It's everywhere. And so the reason that's the case is because if we don't trust our institutions to be able to tackle the problems that face us, then those problems will never really be tackled. And we need to restore trust first, trust in our institutions, trust specifically in Congress. And that means that we need to find ways to regain that trust. And the way you regain trust when it's been lost is to be humble, right? To be vulnerable, to give up power. So one of the most common ideas people suggest is term limits. And term limits are a fantastic example of a bad idea, but not doing them would be worse.
That's a good...
Right?
Yeah.
Because you wouldn't want term limits for your mechanic. Oh, sorry, you can't work on my car. You've already put your 6 years in, you got to go home.
Right.
Or your doctor or anybody else. But that's because we trust people in those professions for the most part. But we need term limits, even though that would prevent someone who's good at the job from getting better at it.
Yes.
Because it's a way to show the American people that their trust is most important, and we're willing to do what we can in the time that we have, and then let someone else try. And so congressional reform is about all of these ideas. We need to make sure that if you go to Congress, you have to take all of your personal finances and put them in a blind trust, right? Because we don't trust members of Congress to not use their power and influence inappropriately to enrich themselves. And so they need to demonstrate they're not going to do that by putting their money in a blind trust. Likewise, we need to ban insider trading for Congress because we can't trust Congress to not use that information inappropriately. Heck, we probably ought to have everyone in Congress, live in a barracks or a dorm, because
That's a good idea, like college.
Yeah, because that
or
will
the Army.
show that Congress is giving up the wealth and trappings that might otherwise be associated with the honor of public office and really focusing on service.
Graft is quite a temptation, isn't it?
It is absolutely temptation, and graft and corruption and the betrayal of the American people are the realities of our relationship with our elected officials today, at every level, but especially at the federal level.
Yeah. How do you know at this point, is there, in Congress, is there a certain percentage that's known about how many people would be in favor of term limits?
It's difficult to know because people don't want to answer that question publicly because it is contrary to the needs of their own party. Parties are able to be successful because they're able to elect people to own a seat for a long period of time, which allows them to focus on other races. Because once you have a seat, you get to keep that seat for as long as you want it, and it also allows you to establish more prestige in your party to raise more money to support your party. And so fundamentally, term limits are an idea which, even though the people want, are contrary to what the parties need. So yeah, I think a lot of members of Congress would privately support them. And some have publicly announced that they would. Our current member, for example, says that she likes the idea of term limits and has signed a pledge that she won't run more than a certain number of terms. But in terms of actually getting a bill on the table, nothing like that is really advanced.
I see. Okay. And, why don't we go right into it?
Sure.
Let me bring it to Indiana in the 5th District, to be particular. What are issues, because there's so many things out there, as you said, they're on fire.
Yeah.
For the Indiana, and this can also lead into the rest of the nation. We get international viewers as well. But in terms of, for Congress is where the purse strings are, and the laws start. What are, we don't have to go into everything, although we'd be here for hours, is some pertinent issues immediately that need to be addressed representing Indiana.
Yeah. I think specifically to our area, right, taxes and inflation have been particularly challenging for us, right? So one of that is tax complexity. So in order for you to compete in the economy, in order to be successful as an individual, take care of yourself, your family, you have to be able to earn an income, and that income is taxed. You start a business, that business is taxed. The complexity and challenges of that tax system is a barrier to many individuals' success. And so complexity of that system, unfairness in that system, inconsistent enforcement of that system is a huge issue. And the other side of that tax equation is the aspect of spending itself, especially with regard to inflation, right? And because costs are so variable and out of control in many areas, things like education, I mean, the cost of education is far exceeded the cost of other goods in terms of its growth, the cost of housing. These things are presenting an immediate crisis to members of our community throughout the district because it's becoming harder and harder for folks to be able to take care of their families and their personal needs due to the burden of the complexity of taxes on the one end, as well as the cost of goods and services and inflation on the other. And these are critical issues that we have to address more strongly. And unfortunately, there is no good way to address them except through lots of painful and difficult negotiations that will create costs for a lot of us.
The costs, overall costs.
Overall costs, absolutely.
And so dealing with the inflation issue is a starting point.
Yeah.
Do you have any ideas at this point that either legislative or something that you'd like to get going?
Yeah, so
because also the spending, the budget is just off the charts, and included with that is the international spending.
Right. So unfortunately, there's not a lot that government can do directly to control the influence of inflation in the nature of our system right now. And I think that most Americans want a government whose role in the economy is to provide some light touch for regulation, but not to have a government-controlled economy. We don't want to live in a country like that. Some people do in the world, but we don't want to live in a government-controlled economy, which means the government's ability to influence inflation is relatively limited. What we can influence, and within the confines of the system that we want to live in, and more importantly, within the culture that we want to reside in, is that we can influence certain kinds of behaviors. So for example, let's talk about gas. One of the reasons gas is expensive is because there's a high demand for gas. And so if we can encourage more work from home programs, then less people will need gas and gas prices will go down, right?
Sure.
That's a very simple example of a way that we can help address inflation. Now, is it good to spend federal money on that? That's a harder discussion, but it's an example of one of the things we can do to address costs.
One of the big issues on that was also a pipeline, and the whole process of the transition.
Sure, absolutely.
With oil into gas.
Yeah, absolutely. And so where gas is where our gasoline comes from, right? Where it is pulled out of the ground, how it is refined, how it is sold, how it is transported. All of those things affect the cost of gas. In the case of the pipeline, long term, yes, it would have reduced cost and created more opportunity. Short term, it takes several years to build these things. So even if we were to reauthorize that pipeline right now, which again is a worthy consideration, it wouldn't have an immediate impact on the cost of gas. So we should consider that as part of our process, but recognizing that in order to address these issues right away, we've got to look at short-term and long-term solutions.
I hear you. They're also in the big battle between the president and the state of Texas right now, which is quite a big issue.
Absolutely.
Is that the president is also threatening to close down the natural gas pipeline with them unless he gets his way. That I see, and I know on that side there is a big issue of concern about views of the climate change, but it also appears as though it's a kind of a political fight,
right?
Really more so than the climate change issue.
Yeah, and these are dangerous precedents, and it's difficult because whenever we hear a story, we get put into the partisan box of this party versus that party in this situation. It's come down to that, hasn't it? Because it's come to that. But what has happened, and this has happened more and more in recent years, is that we're willing to play politics with things that affect people's lives dramatically. It's no longer, hey, I want to build this bridge in my district and you want to build that fish hatchery, let's make a deal on the back end that might affect jobs 6 months, a year, 2 years down the road. It's now, no, these people will live or die, and what are you willing to horse trade for me to allow them to live or die? We've gotten to the point where we are playing politics with people's lives and livelihoods in a way that is, I think, unprecedented in living memory. And again, it's not just one party or the other.
I agree with you.
Both parties are willing to make these kinds of choices. And in the case of Texas, we know that there's a crisis. We know that people are trying to address ways to do this, but neither side is really willing to come to the table and say, let's analyze what it means to have a responsible, secure border and an appropriate American-centered values in our immigration system and develop our process around that. All we have is sort of talking points. Oh, we've got to enforce the law. Oh, we've got to close our borders. Well, guess what? That's just talking points. That doesn't really address the issue. And what we have now is we have political fighting that is truly affecting people.
Yeah. Well, maybe we've got a different point of view on that. I think it's culture clash.
It's a good thing.
It's a culture clash. And the thing is, how would you? Because I'm thinking about this. I'm because this is a deep question. Is if you were voted into Congress?
Yes.
How would you address or pursue having this? Trying to make something constructive out of that, because we're heading for a rupture.
Yeah, we are.
Seriously. And what are thoughts that you have? And we can move from the Texas border issue.
I think that getting elected to Congress, the first step, the day after the election in November, not in January where you go get seated, but the day after the next step is to develop relationships with all the other members of Congress you can and say, let's talk about what we can do, independent of party, independent of position, to address this crisis of trust. Because again, there are lots of good people who identify as Republicans and Democrats and Libertarians and Green Party and whatever else, but the people who are in power are not able to do the good things. They are confined by the sources of influence in their parties and in those special interest groups.
Is there a group right now within Congress that is trying to pursue your goal?
I'm not aware of any caucus or any group in Congress that is focused specifically on nonpartisan restoration of trust and the reform of Congress. But I think that is the essential, that is the most fundamental group. And so I think day one after the election, even before being seated, it's about building those relationships, getting a hold of all the people that you can in Congress and sitting down and saying, hey, how do we do this? How do we come in on day one and pass rules that are about giving up power for the purposes of restoring trust from the American people so that we can show them we really want to work together? How do we cut lobbyists out of the picture? How do we prevent the insider trading of stock? How do we have term limits so people know that we're really there to serve them? And I have faith that most people are good people. Even most members of Congress are probably good people, even though they can't be very good people within the confines of the realities right now.
Yeah. Well, that will certainly be a Mr. Smith Goes to Washington challenge.
Certainly.
And well, back to Indiana and its relationship with D.C.
Sure.
What are some other matters that you would want to address?
Yeah, so I think one of the questions that we need to figure out now is how funding, oversight, and delegation works with regard to D.C. and the states. And so most of the services that you receive from the federal government or the government spends money on the states, it's allocated in Washington, maybe either through a direct authorization or sort of an automatic reauthorization of that agency. And the agency either has offices, federal offices here, or very often they provide funding to the state version of their office, who then implements policies in accordance with sort of what that state wants to do / what the federal government wants to do. It's a big mess. Whereas the reality is that in most places, people who live in those communities, who work in those communities, have good ideas for how best to spend that money. And so the more we can decentralize these elements of the federal government, the more that we can gain trust and have value for people as well. So now, too often, decisions about how money is spent in our communities is made by bureaucrats in Washington or by bureaucrats who work for Washington agencies and not by individual communities or community members. Now, basically, if you want to do something with federal money, it's do I have a person who can write that grant in my city's office to get that money? Do I have contact to the agency? We have a VA system. It's great in some areas, relatively speaking. It's terrible in others.
True.
And in our district, for example, we have big challenges, and you go 2 districts over, it's very different. And so that's a good example of an issue we face. In fact, most of what members of Congress do outside of direct work with their role in Congress is constituent services, helping people to navigate the federal bureaucracy, which is ironic because they shouldn't need that help. It should be straightforward.
Right.
Right?
That's very good. It's become a great beast.
It has become a great beast. And the interesting thing is you don't call your state rep and say, oh, I need help with the DMV. You just go to the DMV. And yeah, it's okay. It's not fantastic, but pretty much they do a good job. They got the online kiosk and whatnot. Because it's a state operation, it's close enough to people, they can make things happen. But if you're having problems with Social Security Administration or the VA or anything else, you got to get a hold of your member of Congress and their constituent services person, because that's how far away the federal operations are from everyday folks who need that help, whose tax money is being spent.
Interesting. So you've got a big road ahead of you.
Yeah, but I think all of us do, because we all have a moral responsibility to our country. In whatever way that we find a way to serve that country, whether it's being a good steward in our community, whether it's taking care of our family, whether it's paying taxes and voting, whether it's serving in our armed forces or running for office, I believe we all have a moral duty to our country, to those who came before, and even more importantly, those who are coming after us.
That's a great point. Well, we have a primary coming up in May, and then the election in November.
That's right. And I'm not part of that primary. The primary is between the candidates in each party. I think there are now 12 Republican candidates in the primary. And I know of some Democrats that are planning, but no one is officially filed yet.
Okay.
And so that election will be about picking which of those candidates will advance. A Republican and Democrat, maybe a Libertarian candidate would advance. My election's not till November, in which I will be up against whoever wins those primaries.
Mm-hmm. And that'll be the rundown.
That's right.
That is it. So, and good luck with your run. Tell us a little more about what's coming up ahead for Robby Slaughter for Congress.
Right. So my campaign really has two phases. The first phase is to get on the ballot. And myself and my volunteers are going out almost every day and knocking on doors, going to community events, asking for people to sign the form provided by the state government that would allow me to run. Doesn't mean they're going to vote for me. It just means they're okay with my name being on the ballot.
Sure.
And because I need thousands upon thousands of signatures, it's an incredibly labor-intensive process. You can't do it online. You have to do it in person. You have to basically be witnessed by the person signing the form. It is incredibly time-consuming.
Oh, of course.
And so that is virtually almost all of the effort I'm doing right now, because nothing else matters until I'm on the ballot. Other candidates are already on the ballot, and they're focusing mostly on fundraising. In fact, I've talked to many of them, and they spend almost all of their time on the phone asking for money from other people, which is, I understand why they're doing it, but to me, I'd much rather be with the voters. That's why I'm going and talking to folks every day, asking for signatures, finding out what matters to them. Once that first phase is over and I'm on the ballot successfully, which again will be relatively soon, I'm more than halfway my signatures and I'm plowing away every day, then I will move into campaigning directly. And that's much more about developing a better understanding of what the people in our district want and need. I've already got a sense of it, having thousands of conversations over the past few months, but also I want to have more town halls, more discussions, more community meetings, give more speeches, but even more importantly, do more listening. Because it's not about me. It's not about some ideology being required of me by a party. It's about what people actually want and need in the 5th District of Indiana.
And for those who don't know, how many counties do you have to cover?
Yeah, so the 5th District is all of Hamilton County where we are now, Tipton, Howard, Delaware, Madison, and Grant counties. So it's 6 counties in total. It's about 600,000 voters, almost 1 million people.
That's a lot of signatures.
It is. And, it's a fascinating district as well because half of the population's here in Hamilton County, which is relatively urban and affluent. We've got cities like Carmel and Fishers and Noblesville and Westfield that are doing quite well. And then we have other places in the county which are much more rural, that are agriculture-based, right? We have areas where there's strong factory bases, such as in Kokomo and Marion. So it's a really diverse district.
Yes, it really is. It's really Indiana. A lot of people don't realize how industrial Indiana has been, but it is very much the core. North of here would be very, very agricultural.
Yeah, that's right. And so what I do is I go places every day. I was at a basketball game. I watched the Elwood Panthers, the Lady Panthers play the lapel team in Frankton. I watched Amaya Collins, who's a senior there, score her 1,000th point.
Awesome.
The crowd went wild. It was fantastic.
I bet that was.
I'm going to union halls to meet people. I'm going to Lions Clubs meetings. I'm going to, farm bureaus. I'm going to coffee shops. I'm going everywhere I can go all across our district to meet folks. And I think it is about meeting people where they are and listening to them, hearing from them.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me, not the same, but it's like when I was a cub reporter at the Bedford Times Mail and the Bloomington Bedford Herald Times back in the day. And it kind of gives you a passport to your community.
That's right.
And that is a great experience.
Yeah, because what's happening in, Kiwanis clubs or 4-H halls or I was at a gun show in Muncie the other day. These are places where there are real people living their real lives. And for the most part, politicians don't show it at them. I almost never see another candidate for any office in the places that I go. Because I think that for the most part, and again, this is because of the structure of our system now, they can't afford to go there. They have to go to the places where they can get people to write big checks. So they can get more money to buy ads and signs, to hire more fundraisers to raise more money, really just to scare their own party into voting against the other side. And I'm here for the ideas. I'm here for the country. I'm not here for my party. I'm not part of any party. There's no time for a party, right?
Until after your election.
Well, no, and even then, right?
No, I mean in terms of having a party.
Well, yeah, I think it might be a little bit of celebration for one day, but then back to work.
Exactly. Well, best wishes to you, Robby.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for being with us today and talking about your concerns and your ideas for the upcoming next year's new Congress. And best wishes to you on your election.
Thank you.
And that's it for today's program. Today's episode, we had Robby Slaughter, who is the independent candidate for Indiana's 5th District for Congress. We'd like to thank our sponsor, Hotel Carmichael. We're shooting today from Feinstein's, and we look forward to being with you on our next episode of The Omnibus Show.
If you enjoyed this program, please like, share, and subscribe to continue the conversation. For the Omnibus Show newsletter, please sign up at theomnibusshow.com.